The silence of 2 in the morning has a very specific sound. It is not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping world. It is the loud, ringing hum of an overactive mind. Across the United States, from the high-rises of Manhattan to the quiet suburbs of Ohio, millions of people are currently experiencing the exact same ritual. They wake up suddenly, their eyes snapping open in the darkness. There is no noise that disturbed them, no nightmare that chased them out of sleep. They are simply awake. The first thing they do is reach for the nightstand. The blue light of the smartphone hits their retinas like a physical blow, illuminating a face lined with exhaustion and a singular, recurring fear. They look at the time, 2:14 a.m. Then comes the mental math, the desperate, frantic calculation that every modern human knows by heart. If I fall asleep right now, I can still get 4 hours and 45 minutes of rest. If I'm still awake in 20 minutes, I'm looking at 4 hours. By the time the sun rises, I will be a ghost of myself, fueled by caffeine and cortisol, struggling to survive another 10-hour shift. This is the American sleep crisis, but we don't call it a crisis of geography or culture. We call it a personal failure. We call it insomnia. We treat it like a broken gear in a machine that needs to be oiled with melatonin or hammered back into place with a prescription sedative. We have been conditioned to believe that a human being is a battery, one that must be plugged in for exactly 8 hours of uninterrupted charging. If the connection breaks in the middle of the night, we assume the battery is defective. But what if the panic you feel at 2 a.m. isn't a sign of a disorder, but the voice of a biological truth that has been suppressed for 2 centuries? What if that window of wakefulness is actually the most creative, calm, and spiritually profound state a human being can experience? We are currently spending billions of dollars trying to cure ourselves of being human. We have built an entire civilization that is terrified of the dark, not because of what hides in the shadows, but because of what the darkness reveals about our own nature. The pressure to perform, to be on, and to maintain a perfect monolithic block of sleep is a relatively new invention. It is younger than the United States itself. Before the light bulb, before the factory whistle, and before the alarm clock became our morning executioner, the night looked completely different. It wasn't a void to be filled with unconsciousness. It was a sanctuary divided into 2 parts. Tonight, we are going to look past the diagnoses and the pill bottles. We are going to investigate how we were tricked into believing that our natural rhythm was a disease, and how an $87 billion industry is profiting from the fact that you can't stop staring at your ceiling. If you were to walk down a cobblestone street in London in the year 1650 and ask a random passerby about their first sleep, they wouldn't give you a confused look. They wouldn't think you were talking about a dream or a nap. To them, the question would be as mundane as asking what they had for breakfast. In the 17th century, the phrase first sleep was not a medical term. It was a universal human reality. It appears over 2,000 times in historical documents, spanning 12 different languages and nearly every continent on Earth. It shows up in the epic poetry of Homer, the sophisticated Latin of Virgil, and the gritty, relatable stories of Chaucer. It is found in the medical manuals of Renaissance France and the oral histories passed down through generations in West Africa. It surfaces in the travel journals of explorers in Brazil and the cold, formal depositions of courtrooms in London. For thousands of years, every writer who used the term assumed their readers knew exactly what it meant. No one ever stopped to define it. No one wrote a footnote explaining the mechanics of waking up in the middle of the night. It was that ordinary. It was that deeply embedded in the rhythm of being alive. Then something impossible happened. Sometime in the early 1800s, the phrase first sleep simply vanished. It didn't fade away slowly like an old-fashioned trend. It wasn't replaced by a more modern synonym. It was scrubbed from the collective human vocabulary across multiple cultures in the span of a single century. An entire dimension of human experience, a state of consciousness that every person on the planet had shared for millennia, was quietly removed from our language. And almost nobody alive noticed that it was gone. The man who eventually stumbled upon this missing piece of our history was A. Roger Eckertch, a history professor at Virginia Tech. In the early 1990s, while he was digging through the dusty archives of nighttime culture before the Industrial Revolution, he found a court record from 1697. It was the testimony of a 9-year-old girl named Jane Routh. She was telling a judge about the night her mother died. She casually mentioned that her mother had woken up after her first sleep and gone outside. Eckertch stared at those words, first sleep. He had never heard them before. As a modern man, he assumed sleep was one continuous block. But the girl in the courtroom used the phrase with the same casualness we use for the word Sunday. No one in that 1697 courtroom questioned her. The judge didn't ask for clarification. The lawyers didn't look confused. Because in 1697, everyone knew that sleep came in two parts. Curiosity turned into an obsession for Eckertch. He began a massive search, and the floodgates opened. He found hundreds, then thousands of references. The pattern was remarkably consistent across centuries and continents. People would go to bed between 9 and 10 in the evening. They would sleep for roughly 3 to 4 hours. This was the first sleep. Then they would wake up naturally, sometime after midnight. They would stay awake for an hour or two in a state of calm alertness. Finally, they would return to bed for the second sleep, which lasted until dawn. This was not a European habit or a regional oddity. This was the dominant way human beings had slept for all of recorded history. The Latin called it primus somnus. The French called it premier sommeil. The Italians called it primo sonno. From the ancient Greeks to the indigenous tribes of the Amazon, the biphasic rhythm was the standard. But why did we do it? And more importantly, what happened during that mysterious gap in the middle of the night that was so valuable we did it for 10,000 years? In 1992, while Professor Eckertch was digging through dusty archives, a psychiatrist named Thomas Ware was conducting a radical experiment at the National Institute of Mental Health. Ware didn't know about the historical first sleep. He wasn't a historian. He was interested in how light affects the human brain. He wanted to know what would happen to a modern human being if you stripped away every single trace of the industrial world. No light bulbs, no smartphones, no street lights, and no clocks. He took 14 healthy volunteers and plunged them into darkness for 14 hours every single day. For 4 weeks, these people lived in a world where the sun dictated the rules. At first, the subjects did what any sleep-deprived modern person would do. They crashed. They slept for 11 or 12 hours straight, repaying a sleep debt they didn't even know they were carrying. But by the 4th week, something incredible emerged. Their bodies stopped sleeping in one block. Every single subject settled into a precise identical rhythm. They would sleep for 4 hours, wake up for 2 hours of quiet wakefulness, and then sleep for another 4 hours. Without any outside influence, without reading a single history book, their biology had automatically reverted to the ancient biphasic pattern. The laboratory had accidentally rediscovered the first sleep. But it was what happened during those 2 hours of midnight wakefulness that truly shocked the researchers. Ware decided to measure the subjects' hormones during that gap. He found that their levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with deep relaxation, nursing, and the postcoital glow, had spiked to twice its normal level. Even though they were wide awake, their brains were in a state of chemical peace that modern humans almost never experience. The subjects described it as a state of profound calm. They weren't tossing and turning, they weren't worried about their emails or their bank accounts. They felt weightless. Ware noted that this specific state of consciousness is what advanced meditation practitioners spend decades trying to achieve through intense discipline. Yet, for our ancestors, this was a nightly occurrence. It was their birthright. Every single night, for an hour or two, every human on Earth entered a chemically induced sanctuary of reflection and peace. Ware's conclusion was haunting. He suggested that the insomnia we feel today, that 2 a.m. wakefulness, might actually be our bodies trying to reach for that prolactin-rich calm. But because we live in a world of artificial light, we don't allow the process to finish. The moment we wake up, we panic. We turn on a light, we check a screen, and we flood our brains with blue light. This sends a signal to the brain that it's morning. The prolactin vanishes, cortisol spikes, and the calm watch turns into a panic attack. We have betrayed our biology. We have traded a nightly state of enlightenment for a 24/7 cycle of stress. We are fighting a war against a biological clock that has been ticking for millions of years, and we are losing that war every single night at 2 a.m. But the question remains, if this was our natural state, who decided it was a problem? Who was the architect of the 8-hour block? To find the answer, we have to follow the money and the smoke of the rising factories. The murder of the two-sleep system wasn't a biological accident. It was a premeditated economic hit. To understand how we lost our midnight sanctuary, we have to look at the soot-stained streets of the early 19th century. Before this era, the night was a shield. It was dark, expensive to light, and effectively belonged to the individual. But the Industrial Revolution changed the definition of a human being. We were no longer seen as biological creatures with rhythms and souls. We were rebranded as labor units. The first blow came from the light. In 1807, London installed its first gas streetlights. By the mid-1800s, thousands of lamps were pushing back the borders of the night. Artificial light didn't just make the streets safer, it made the day longer. As bedtimes were pushed later and later by the allure of evening social life and productive hours, the night began to shrink. The 3 to 4 hour gap, the watch, was the first thing to be squeezed. People started going to bed at 11 p.m. instead of 9 p.m., but the factory whistle still blew at 6 a.m. Something had to give. But light was only the tool. The motive was efficiency. In the 1830s, a movement swept through Britain and the United States called the Early Rising Movement. It wasn't about health, it was about moral conditioning. Middle-class parenting manuals began instructing mothers to wean their children off the biphasic rhythm. Why? Because a child who wakes up at 2 a.m. is a child who might grow into a worker who expects autonomy over their time. Industry needed synchronized labor. If a factory has 1,000 workers, it cannot have them waking and sleeping at different intervals. It needs them to collapse into one unbroken block of exhaustion and wake up exactly when the steam whistle screams. This era gave birth to a haunting profession that literally marks the transition from biology to capital, the knocker-upper. Before cheap alarm clocks existed, workers paid people to walk the streets at 3 or 4 in the morning with long bamboo poles. These knocker-uppers would tap on bedroom windows, violently dragging human beings out of their natural second sleep. Imagine the trauma of that transition. A century of human beings being poked and prodded out of their beds by a paid industry whose only job was to ensure you didn't listen to your body's need for rest. In 1787, Levi Hutchins invented the first mechanical alarm clock. He didn't invent it to help people catch a beautiful sunrise. He built it because he was terrified of being late for work. That tiny ticking box on your nightstand is the ultimate symbol of our surrender. It is the moment sleep stopped belonging to our DNA and started answering to the employer. We were told that sleeping twice was lazy or inefficient. We were shamed into a monolithic 8-hour block because that block is the most convenient shape for a shift-based economy. We traded the watch, that hour of profound meditative calm, for an extra 2 hours of factory labor. And as the language of first sleep vanished from our books, the memory of our freedom vanished with it. We became a society of sleepers who are constantly on the clock, even in our dreams. But when the body inevitably rebels against this forced rewiring, the system doesn't apologize. Instead, it finds a way to sell us the cure. When the Industrial Revolution successfully broke our natural sleep cycle, it created a massive unintended side effect. A population that felt fundamentally broken. But where a biologist sees a crisis, a capitalist sees a market. Today, the struggle to stay unconscious for 8 consecutive hours has birthed one of the most profitable sectors on the planet. The global sleep aid market was valued at roughly $87 billion in 2024. This isn't just about mattresses and pillows. This is an all-encompassing apparatus of pharmaceuticals, supplements, wearable tech, specialized clinics, and white noise machines. The centerpiece of this industry is the medicalization of the 2 a.m. wake-up call. In the United States alone, between 50 and 70 million people report symptoms of insomnia every year. The most common complaint? Maintenance insomnia, waking up in the middle of the night and being unable to fall back asleep. In the 16th century, this was called Tuesday night. In the 21st century, it's a diagnosis. It's a reason to see a doctor. It's a reason to spend $4 billion annually on insomnia drugs. Think about the sheer irony of this financial architecture. We work 10-hour shifts in artificial light, staring at screens that trick our pineal glands into thinking the sun never sets. We drink caffeine to survive the afternoon slump caused by our compressed sleep. Then, when we lay down and our ancient 10,000-year-old biology tries to perform its natural first sleep and second sleep ritual, we panic. We feel a surge of cortisol because we are failing at the 8-hour rule, and so we reach for a pill to chemically knock ourselves out. We are paying billions of dollars to suppress a state of consciousness that used to be free. We are medicating a disease that was actually our ancestors' greatest source of mental clarity. The pharmaceutical industry has no financial incentive to tell you that your 2 a.m. wakefulness is a prolactin-rich echo of your natural self. There is no profit in telling you to sit in the dark for an hour and reflect on your dreams. There is, however, immense profit in making you believe that your brain is malfunctioning and requires a chemical intervention to stay normal. Even the wellness industry has joined the hunt. We buy smart rings and watches that track our sleep stages with neurotic precision. We look at charts on our phones the next morning, feeling depressed if we didn't hit the deep sleep target the app set for us. We have turned rest into a competitive sport, a data-driven performance. We have become so alienated from our own bodies that we trust a piece of silicone on our wrist more than the feeling in our own bones. This $87 billion machine is built on a single powerful lie, that you are a machine that needs to be fixed. It ignores the fact that for 99% of human history, broken sleep was simply human sleep. By pathologizing the midnight watch, we have effectively monetized the gap between our industrial schedules and our biological reality. We aren't just losing sleep. We are being billed for the privilege of losing our history. The ultimate irony of our modern struggle is that we are fighting a war against ourselves. We have spent 2 centuries trying to lobotomize our biological history, yet every night at 2 a.m., that history whispers back. The question we must ask ourselves is not how to fix our sleep, but how to reclaim the humanity we traded for a factory whistle. If the 8-hour block is a modern invention, and if our insomnia is actually a biological echo, then the cure isn't found in a pill bottle, it's found in a shift of perspective. Reclaiming the night starts with a radical act of self-forgiveness. The next time you wake up in the middle of the night, stop the mental math. Stop the frantic calculation of how many hours are left before your alarm. The moment you stop treating your wakefulness as a failure, the cortisol spike that keeps you awake begins to dissolve. You are not malfunctioning, you are merely experiencing a state of consciousness that your ancestors considered a gift. In that quiet gap between the first and second sleep, there is a profound opportunity. Our ancestors used this time for prayer, for reflection, for intimacy, and for deep creativity. They didn't have TikTok to scroll through or emails to answer. They had the darkness, and in that darkness, they found a clarity that the neon-lit world has stolen from us. If you find yourself awake, don't reach for the blue light of your phone. That light is a chemical signal that tells your brain the sun is rising, shattering the prolactin-rich calm that Thomas Ware discovered in his lab. Instead, lean into the shadows. Imagine what would happen if we stopped pathologizing our nature. What if we allowed ourselves the grace to simply be in the middle of the night? Perhaps we would rediscover the vivid dreams that have been compressed out of our lives. Perhaps we would find the solutions to problems that seem unsolvable in the frantic noise of the day. We are currently living in a world that is always on, but our brains were designed for the off cycles. We need the watch. We need the gap. We may never be able to fully return to a pre-industrial schedule. Our jobs, our schools, and our global economy demand a certain level of synchronization. But we can change how we relate to the night. We can stop being victims of an $87 billion industry that profits from our fear. We can recognize that the 8-hour rule is a convenience for the employer, not a requirement for the soul. History shows us that we were once the masters of the night. We didn't fear the wakeful hours, we cherished them. The first sleep and second sleep were the bookends of a spiritual life that we have almost entirely lost. But the evidence is still there, in the archives, in the laboratory, and most importantly, in your own body. You are the descendant of thousands of generations of people who woke up in the dark and felt at peace. That peace is still inside you, waiting to be recognized. So tonight, if you wake up at 2 a.m., don't panic. Don't reach for a sedative. Just lie there. Feel the weight of the history you carry in your cells. Listen to the silence that has been waiting for you. You aren't broken. You are just awake in a world that has forgotten what it means to be human. And in that quiet, honest moment, you might just find that the superpower you've been looking for was hidden in the darkness all along. Welcome back to The Watch. Subscribe and join us as we continue to uncover the hidden truths of the human experience.